and welcome to Chapter 2 in Security Architecture and Design, the Art of Security Assessment. So the outline for Chapter 2 is as follows. Why is it an art and not an engineering, and not engineering? The introduction of the process, necessary ingredients, the threat landscape, basically who are the attackers, why do they want to attack a system in general, how much risk to tolerate, so what's the risk, appetite for risk, and how to get started. So jumping straight in to why is it an art and not engineering? Engineering is a branch of science and technology concerned with the design, building, and use of engines, machines, and structures. Security architecture, though, is a little bit different. So whenever someone is an architect, they need to understand the current activity threat agents that are in action or in play, and apply the appropriate responses based upon that information. And it's basically a bit of a skill beyond that of just simple engineering. The idea here is that you want to apply the appropriate measures based upon the current situation. Some of it is going to even be a certain amount of intuition. It's not necessarily something as dry and clear cut as you might find in some engineering disciplines. So delving into the process, the kind of approach that a security architect may follow. So there are methodologies of sorts, and these may be more frameworks than they are explicit methodologies, but they allow the architect to start working through some of the details without losing track of where they are in the entire architecture and the methodology. So it allows them to kind of dig in without losing their place, so to speak. Different architects have different ways of describing these things, but there are kind of some commonalities that will be involved. There's typically going to be a series of steps that people might take, and it's going to be about understanding the system architecture and the security architecture, and how those two things interact with each other. The following is kind of a list. These are basically things you need to understand to have some idea about how to be a successful architect, right, or security architect. You need to know a bit about your attack surfaces. So what are your vulnerabilities, or what are the places that are exposed to people who might wish you harm? You go through the threats for a particular type of system, and you want to consider how those threats are usually attacked. So what is the approach, and what are the people that are utilizing those surfaces? What are they trying to accomplish? What is their goal? Then you want to assess the risk of each one, rating them to some extent so that you can help prioritize the attack surfaces. And that also helps you then prioritize the remediation, so how you're going to address that potential risk. Understanding that not all risks can be mitigated. They may be something that is determined to be acceptable or not. So that's another thing to keep in mind. You want to factor in the existing security controls, what exists today that they're trying to mitigate the risks, and then intersect basically the threat attack methods against the inputs and the connections that are associated with the things. And this whole thing together becomes the set of attack surfaces. Then you go through and essentially come up with what are the basic ways that things get in and how are things connected. You take all that information and it starts helping you figure out what are the current attack vectors that might exist on a given system. So what are the directions from which something can attack your environment? And it's a simple statement, but it hides a lot of detail, right? Because there's a lot of things that go into that: the architecture, the threats, attack surfaces, and mitigation. And this is a pretty good way of thinking of. You got to understand the architecture before you can do a whole lot in terms of determining what the threats might be. You need to understand how things are tied together, how they talk to each other, what's exposed where, and so on. This is going to give you a sense of the attack surfaces, so the various ways that someone might come in, and the mitigation strategies that would be leveraged to protect against those attacks. Then your next step is going to go through uh, keeping that sketch that we just saw in mind, and you're going to break down those parts into a bit more details. There's going to be diagrams, um, and you need to understand the diagrams. It's not just about diagrams for diagrams' sakes. It's diagrams as a visual representation of how the system is actually constructed. Then you want to think about what are the possible threats that would be appropriate for that type of system, because certain architectures may be more prone to certain types of attacks or certain vulnerabilities might exist. Then you want to think about, well, what are the goals each of these threat agents might have? So what are they trying to do? Are they trying to disrupt your operations? Are they trying to steal your information? Are they trying to access some proprietary information? What are they trying to do? And then you think about how they might actually attack. So what attack methods might they utilize, these various unknown agents that exist? And then what are the technical objectives of threat agents applying their attack methods? So list out what you think the technical objectives might be that they're trying to achieve. Decompose, basically factor down the architecture to a level that exposes every possible attack surface. Apply attack methods for expected goals to the attack services. So figure out, given the method, what is it they're trying to accomplish on each of the things where they might be attacking or attempting to attack. So what are the necessary things that need to go into? So the ingredients that need to go into this sort of analysis, right? And it starts with things like taking a look at the threat landscape, um, figuring out what the required risk posture is, the possible controls that might exist, existing limitation, the types of data that might be involved, the runtime model, and the deployment process. And all of those things together are going to help you start coming up with an assessment of a given security situation. So in figure 2.3, um, you get a certain amount of where this information comes from. So your strategy is going to give you some idea of risk posture and landscape, your structures, possible controls and existing limitations, and your specification data sensitivity. So basically the types of data that you might have, the runtime/execution models that are in play, and how things are getting deployed. Those are going to be in some form of specifications. And that those three things together are sometimes referred to as the three S's. Understanding the threat landscape is very important in this sort of scenario. So the key thing is to understand there are different groups targeting and attacking different types of systems. So it's not like there's just one sort of person out there or entity out there trying to attack. Lots of different people, lots of different organizations, and they may be doing so for very different reasons, and they may be trying to accomplish something quite different as well. So you've got a threat agent, which is a unique type of attacker. So it's someone or something that may be trying to get in. It may be an organization, maybe an individual, maybe a group, um, could be one of your competing companies even. So it could be lots of different things in the case of an organization. So they have some motivation and willingness to attack in some form or another. They're not all equal. There's lots of different types of them, and some of them pose more risks than others. They oftentimes have different goals. They have different ways that they're going to try to accomplish things, and they have different abilities and access. So not all of them have the same level of skills or potentially access to your environments as others. And they have different types of risk profiles. And because of that, some of them will be willing to do more to be successful than others. There's some that may not try real hard, others might try really hard. So continuing that thought, uh, you can think about these different types of human attackers as follows: intelligence, adaptivity, creativity. So the key thing to keep in mind is that they're going to probe, test, and reverse engineer. So it's not going to be some sort of blind thing. They may be very, very adaptive and very creative, and may be quite capable. And so they will try to figure out what's been done. So who are they, and why do they want to attack, right? Cybercrime's a something that is an organized criminal's dream come true, right? Because it can be anonymous, they can be done from a distance. They don't necessarily that can happen very quickly because they can drain a bank account very quickly. Um, and you don't have to use guns or physical threat or whatever else. And it's potentially the lack of physical violence may consider it a clean crime, although it's certainly not a victimless crime. It is nonetheless a crime, but it doesn't contain with it some of those things like guns and potentially the associated prison sentences that go with such things. So there are definitely documented cases of criminals carefully targeting a particular organization. So they may spend a lot of time looking for a system. They may do something called sword phishing, where they go through and identify a particular individual to attempt social engineering. They may spend a lot of time, money, and effort trying to get into a particular organization. And especially if they find out that there's some sort of a known vulnerability that exists there. Um, there's also a little incentive to map out a particular person's digital life. So there's a lot of people, right, is one of the challenges. Um, so there's also a lot of people out there who don't necessarily patch their system, stay up to date. They have poor passwords. They don't maybe rotate their passwords, or they use the same password across all of their accounts, various other things. So that makes them potentially a vulnerability. One of those people inside of your organization brings that vulnerability to you. So sometimes they're after a certain thing, so a specific target, and then maybe they're looking for one set of data, say maybe your customers' data or your customers' email accounts or credit card or social security numbers. Or they may also be looking for several different things and try to make it look like do some sort of diversionary tactic so that it's not obvious what they took, because what they took might have a very limited life, say in the case of passwords, once that information is notified, right? So once you know that they've taken your password file, you force everybody to change their password, that becomes less valuable. Um, some of these things are often very well planned and coordinated. They may be very secretive and very careful about what they're doing, and they may be highly sophisticated. So there sometimes are ways that you try to visualize information, um, and sometimes it's helpful to do that because there's lots of different threats that may exist inside of an organization. So uh, to take a look at what those things might be, there's different motivations, different rewards, different types of things that do cause problems. Taking a look at the center of the threat, this is sort of like a mind map kind of concept. You have a particular threat agent over here. Some of them are inanimate things that are threatful, such as a pandemic, physical disaster, some sort of technical failure. These are things that people aren't involved. That's what the word inanimate is meaning, but it is nonetheless potentially a threat, right? Or something that may be causing you threat. So maybe it's Mother Nature with a hurricane. Who knows? There are sentient, which is people, organizations, groups, and so on that have some motivation. Maybe it's reward of some sort. Maybe it's just emotional. They want to have the revenge on you because you fired them or something. Or maybe it's they want to be able to brag about, look at what I hacked over here, right? Um, and so on. So this is basically a way of kind of looking at the threat from a terms of a set of characteristics, essentially a way of kind of visualizing the various relationships of the items together. So wrapping up chapter two, we achieve information assurance when information security or information and information systems are protected against attack, and that's a key sort of thing to understand. And that's also about doing things where there's availability, integrity, authentication, confidentiality, and non-repudiation associated with it as well. So these application of these services together is all about protecting, detecting, and reacting to these threats. So in addition to incorporating protection mechanisms, you need to expect attacks and include attack detection tools and basically be able to recover and react to those attacks when they do occur. They may be unexpected in the sense that you don't know when they're going to come, but they should not be unexpected in that you don't expect them to occur. So you need to expect attacks to occur all the time. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Chapter 2. Stay safe, and I'll talk with you next week.